but we expect that to come in more in line. On page 168, on the fixed income portfolio, there was an event. We talked about this quite a bit at the CIC meeting, and I don't know if it's Bart here if he wants to say anything, but there was some news out of GAM, who managed an unconstrained portfolio, concern about some news that came out about the director of the business unit of that unconstrained group, and there we've seen a lot of assets leaving. You are in a separately managed portfolio, but you are liquidating that portfolio. Bart, do you want to say anything else about that?
So just to give you a little background on it, July 31st, one of the portfolio managers was suspended by GAM. This was the second key person out of the 3 key people that we had in our contract that has left the account. About a week later, there were GAM was getting a lot of withdrawal requests. They put a gate on their commingled fund so that people couldn't redeem their shares. We are in a separate account, so our holdings are in our name at our custodian. This contract ends September 30th. It was in the terms of our original agreement. Right now, we're in liquidation mode with no intention to renew at September 30th.
They're an international emerging market manager.
They are unconstrained.
They can go anywhere. So we've been discussing about the structure of that, and remember, you didn't have a non-core allocation at that point in time.
Right.
So. But if you go to page 169, you can see the performance of the fixed income. The 2 top buckets look at the core fixed income portfolio. They met both their policy objectives and did so very nicely. The non-core, although we're showing a track record, that non-core composite really has only existed since January of this year. So we're showing performance of those assets that were moved from core to non-core, but we're not going to have a rank them against the policy target because it hasn't been in existence. But you can see fiscal year to date, certainly nice performance for both managers. The remainder of this is looking at your alternatives, and I think you're going to be having separate reports on the alternatives, so I wasn't planning on going into that. Anything on this fiscal year to date report that you would like to see that you haven't seen, we can certainly add to that report. But nice return for the fiscal year to date. Any questions?
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you
We
very
have
much.
to, do you want me to say it's preliminary, but I have to write preliminary. It's preliminary, but I think the total fund was at 1.4% gross for the month.
Okay.
Member Frank, council members, I'm Paul Chapman, Director of Real Estate Development Turner, and I have Seth Marcus from Townsend here, and we had another strong quarter both in the real estate and real asset buckets, so I'll let Seth introduce you out.
Appreciate it, thanks. So here we're talking about first quarter performance, so the lag is considerable as we're sitting here at the end of August, but looking at the first quarter, we did do a pretty thorough review at year end. We do the annual review of all the individual funds. I'll keep this pretty brief and just talk about some of the high level, but I will get a little granular with a couple deals that really moved.
You're talking about first calendar quarter?
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
as of March.
So it's our third quarter.
Correct.
Let's talk our terms of our fiscal year.
Sorry about that. Yes. So there were a couple significant deals that drove the short-term performance. I'll talk maybe a little bit about some of the specifics, but generally speaking, you can see the performance, and I know there's a couple different books out there, so I'm looking at page 4 of the Townsend materials. And this has a chart in the middle of the table showing quarter 1 through 5 year returns. So per the policy, we focus on a 5-year return. We continue to have outperformance, as you can see, about 120 basis points, 11.7% net return over the 5-year period. The highlight on this page is really the 1-year performance. You see 11.3% net over the 12 months ending March 31st, 2018. That's 420 basis points of outperformance to the benchmark. So, stepping back, we've historically said that we expect 6 to 8, 9% return on an annual basis going forward out of the real estate portfolio. We've seen outsized returns. Why is that? Specifically, over this 1-year period, there were 2 specific deals within your portfolio. As you recall, we made a number of commitments to Exeter industrial funds. There's a couple different funds in the portfolio. They have a strategy of buying individual industrial assets, aggregating them and selling as a portfolio. They executed on a $2.4 billion portfolio sale that you all participated in. This was at 9.4% occupancy. It ended up being really about a 40% IRR and a 2.5 times multiple. Obviously, significant driving with the 1-year performance. The second deal, also a $2.4 billion sale of a single asset in New York in the Jamestown core portfolio. This was called Chelsea Market. It was a sale to Google. We all participated in that as well. This was a 30% IRR, and over the whole, we originally made a commitment in 2011. This is a 4 times multiple. So these 2 investments significantly drove the 1-year performance. Interestingly, and we show all the attribution at the back of this presentation. Without those 2 deals, you're still at an 8% return. So we are at as expected, but with those 2, we jump up to 11% return for the 1-year period. So strong performance there. When we look at the allocation, we're at roughly 11. We're at a 9% return or 9% allocation versus a 12% target. Some of the reason that has not increased is those sales did result in distributions back to you all because of the asset sales there. This increase, the portfolio is increasing towards that 12% target. We've made a number of commitments this year to Ares Europe, to KKR. Those have already been approved. If we look at slide 6 of my presentation, we show the forward pacing, and we show that we made $240 million of non-core commitments this year. That basically took up the full allocation for 2018. With that said, we built a very stable portfolio with managers that we continue to support and see come back to market with favorable opportunities. And there's a couple that are coming back early. We anticipate seeing maybe 2 of them next month because they will not be available in 2019. I don't think there's a magic date when the calendar changes from December to January. So we are looking to probably pre-commit some 2019 capital later this year, next month, as soon as next month, to 2 managers that are already in your portfolio, follow-on strategies to existing funds that have really performed well, and we don't want to miss out on a vintage just because of the timing, 3 months before the end of the year. So you will see some additional investments this year, but we're really targeting a 2019 capital allocation.
And neither of those will draw capital likely until 2019.
When we look at the rebalanced portfolio, just a minute on that. So the rebalanced portfolio since 2011 now represents 96% of the NAV of the total real estate portfolio. So just under 90 million is in the legacy assets, so legacy portfolio. It's spread across about 6 different positions. 3 of those are sizable. 3 of those are really driving that number. And a couple of them are still performing actually pretty well. The other laggards are selling assets. So it continues to be a smaller piece of the pie. It still is something that we monitor closely. We've had significant realizations in a number of those commitments or investments, and ones that we continue to push. A number of those are also beyond their life of the fund. They are no longer charging asset management fees. They're really in a liquidation position, and that is progressing. The last slide I'll talk about, and only because it's a bit of a change that we've seen over the last couple of quarters. On slide 13, you look at the public market equivalent, which we added probably about a year ago. Historically, if you look at the right-hand side, is the new portfolio of 2011 to inception, and you can see the significant outperformance since the 2011 rebalanced portfolio. we look at the total portfolio dating back to 2004, which has historically underperformed the public market equivalent. Here now we have a slight outperformance, about 20 basis points. The nature of the rebalanced portfolio performing well, and the volatility of the public market. So if you think about first quarter, thinking back to March, the public markets delivered, the REIT market was a negative 3% return. Our portfolio was a positive 3% return, just in that single quarter. So we're seeing that number really start to outperform, and just wanted to highlight that something we added a couple of years ago, and wanted to just highlight that as well. Number of other attribution tables in here, and I'll keep it brief and have you answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? You're performing whatever you have.
Just one, Mr. Chairman, again, based on what you just said, it forming way better. This has been one of your better asset allocation decisions. This portfolio 5 years ago, you saw was it 183? Was the page 190. No, it's a 184. 184 in the 5-year column, 14.3%. That 5 years ago, that allocation was right around zero. Well, it might have been 3%, and really was full of opportunities to invest instead of gone sour in a Great Recession. So over that 5 years, you funded that primarily with a mix of global stocks and core fixed income. So the rate of return on the assets that you funded it with is substantially below 14.3%. So there's been one of your better asset allocation decisions moving into real estate portfolio than the excess returns that Townsend's helped us achieve just added to that.
Shall we move to the real asset?
Yes,
please.
So similar, this is as of March 31st, 2018. And this includes obviously energy, infrastructure, timber, and agriculture. Slide 5 of my presentation really shows the graph of commitments made historically and over the last really 8 years since the inception of the portfolio. So as you recall, we've made about 30 different funds.
Does anybody know what page?
226.
226, thank you.
So if you aggregate this chart, we've made 30 different fund commitments and 18 different managers. So almost almost double the amount of funds per manager, and that's about 2.2 billion of commitments made over this time period. About 40% of that is still uncalled, so there still is some significant uncalled capital there. But when you think about the different portfolios and where we are in the life cycle, the J curve that we continue to talk about, both infrastructure and energy are really outside of the J curve today. That volatility has really stabilized in those two portfolios. They're more established. Obviously, we're seeing J curve in the new commitments and new investments, but from a portfolio standpoint, we're not seeing that volatility as frequently as we were before. And during the first quarter, we closed on a number of commitments, about 160 million. We made some subsequent commitments, as you see there in year-to-date 2018. And these commitments likely satisfy the new capital commitments for 2018. We likely won't see another real assets commitment unless we do see something like we just talked about in real estate, something that's coming to market that offers first close fee breaks or an allocation opportunity for late 2018 to get that capital invested in 2019. On slide 6, it shows the 1-year performance attribution, and this is very consistent with what we've seen in the past. So infrastructure and energy are going to drive the 1-year return. I do think, and we think, when we're talking with staff, that the 1 year is a little bit short-sighted and short-term looking. So we may start to expand this to look at over a 3-year or 5-year cycle now that the portfolio is a bit more established. But because of the size of infrastructure, the size of energy, and the returns that those two drive, they will drive the total return that you see that 1-year return at 7.8%. Infrastructure was at 13.9%, and energy was 9.4% over this 1-year period. Again, that volatility from the inception portfolio has mostly been eliminated. We are still seeing some volatility in the energy sector, and that's more the nature of the sector. If you think about, we looked at annualized returns, 2017, the annualized return was 18%, 2016 was 27%, and then 2015 was a negative 9%. So we're still seeing some volatility there, but because the portfolio is more established with strong managers seeing a lot less. When we look at timber and agriculture, you see very small positive, very small negative over the 1 year period. It's really twofold. So we are still seeing J curve in those portfolios. They do not have a full 3 years performance just yet, which we're still shorter. Those students remain a little later than infrastructure and energy. And those are also, some of those are development opportunities, some of those are, they're much longer term funds, 10, 15 open-ended year funds. When we look at the underlying positions, they are held at about a 1 multiple, so they're held at cost. They're not negative where they're losing capital, they're negative where they're not, have not created the value yet, and we anticipate it will over time. However, we do have concerns about both sectors. The demand side has been slower to materialize than anticipated. So those are conversations that we're having with both managers and staff about opportunities to correct that, or how to address those existing funds. There are some open positions that we can consider moving capital around. I don't anticipate, and I think Paul has mentioned this in the past, a lot of new commitments to those sectors until we see some more stabilization within those two sectors. The remainder of the slides, again, we've seen in the past. Happy to answer any questions. We have a number of different performance cuts, diversification. I think it's important to show that we do show both the real estate and real asset portfolios. The compliance measures were in line with the portfolio as anticipated from a policy perspective and compliance perspective.
Are there any questions? Good. Thank you, Seth. Thank you. Paul, terrific. Private equity.
The private equity performance for the national program starts on Belgian page 260, and with that, I'll turn it over to Richard.
And if you could turn to page 4 of the
263.
Okay, 263. We'll start with the overall performance on the project. I'd say that the milestone item that happened as of March 31st is the net asset value is now about $2 billion for the first time. And that reflects, a lot of commitments made over the last few years as we kind of timed it out rather than putting it all to work at once. The NAV increase in quarter 1 was driven by both contributions, exceeding distributions, and also the performance of the underlying portfolio. The performance wasn't as big as it was in the fourth quarter as of year end, but we still saw a performance increase. And if you look at the overall net IRR, you can see year over year, it goes from since inception 11.4% from 11.1%. That's really reflecting a 1 year IRR of almost 16%. And so it was a good year for the private equity portfolio. Also, if you're keeping track of the older funds, we did have 2 funds move to liquidated, but we also added 2 of the new commitments that were approved. So the active funds stayed steady at 119. The overall the grand total actually increased by 2 funds. If you flip ahead to the next page, this shows how the breakdown of the net asset value occurred over quarter. Compares it to the fourth quarter, then also the first quarter. You can see really in the fourth quarter we did have distributions exceeding contributions. That flipped in the first quarter, and actually it continues for quarter 2. Although distributions did come back, contributions only exceeded distributions by about $3 million in the second quarter. Turning the slide to slide 6, this talks about the details of what's driving the contributions, the distributions, the net gains and losses. And a lot of these funds on this page now, on the 5 largest, are from the 2011 and after. So you're starting to see that portfolio that's really been done over the last 7 years now influencing performance more. On the distributions though, there is a fund listed there twice. It's a 2014 fund. What we're seeing now is some of these older dated funds, they have several companies left. They're actually going out in the market and engaging a secondary broker to sell their portfolio on the secondary market and going to limited partners with that deal. So that's one of the monitoring items that we do, is we'll evaluate that offer. evaluate the process that they went through, and then come up with a recommendation for the SIC staff on whether to continue to hold that, roll it, or to sell it. And in this case, the pricing was just a 2% discount from NAV. We felt like, if you were to run a process yourself, you probably wouldn't have gotten a better price. And so we actually recommend sell. So you see what liquidity coming in from opportunities like that. The next slide on slide 7 is the benchmarking, and this goes by vintage year. So when you look at the RVK reports, it's an aggregate of the whole private equity portfolio. So this is a breakdown, so you can kind of see vintage year by vintage year what's going on, and you can really see the 2004 to 2007 vintage year funds continue to underperform against the benchmarks. Those are also years where the private equity commitments increased quite a bit, and continues to be a drag on performance, which I'll talk about on the next slide. We also added 2015 because we now have 3 years of data, although performance tends to still be volatile even though funds are in their 3rd year of performance. You'll notice that IRR is actually the lowest of the 2011 to 2015. And part of the reason is there's 5 funds in that vintage year, and the only fund that's marked at a loss from 2011 to 2015 is in that 2015 vintage year. And the other 4 funds are at a gain, but it shows you the influence of a fund at a loss. It does kind of drag down the overall performance. And then the net multiple is actually in the 3rd quartile, right at the median cutoff, really, for the by vintage year. The next slide is the public market equivalent, and this compares the 10-year IRR to what if those cash flows were invested into public markets. I like looking at the Russell 3000 because that tends to be the broadest of the indices that are listed here. It comprises about 97-98% of the market cap of the US market. There's 2 things that are going on. Yes.
Is it net or gross?
So we use net cash flows. So if a manager calls for a management fee, that's assumed to be invested into the private the public market. There's 2 things going on here, and we've actually done a little bit more analysis on this to understand. I mean, the first theme is the strong public markets, and we've compared what's happened with your spread with also the private equity benchmark spreads. And there's a high correlation on the movement of the spread. Well, it's going back to 2005. And so what's happening to your portfolio against the PME isn't any different from what we're seeing in the broad private equity universe. The second thing that's going on is looking at the 10-year return by itself, the 8.2%. There's still a strong performance from that legacy portfolio of 2009 and before. It was just 2015 where the net asset value became more than 50% of the 2011 and after funds. And we can run what the legacy portfolio's 10-year IRR is, and that's actually 6.2% or 6.4%. Rather, so you have almost a 2% difference between what the 10-year IRR and what the legacy portfolio is. So you can see the influence of the recent investments on there. We can't run a 10-year IRR on the recent investments because there's not 10 years of history yet. So there is a positive impact from the recent commitments, but it's just going to take a passage of time for that to be reflected more in the 10-year IRR. The next slide is one that I'll end with. And then there's more slides kind of following it to go into details, but it's really kind of looking at the components of our strategy and where's the current state of that strategy. Starting with the annual commitment range of 550 to 650. 2 commitments have been approved, 3 now. I'd say that, for 2018, we're probably going to come in under that. And part of that is just being cautious in the market and where we are. We have a lot of unfunded commitments out there. And we continue to look at the pipeline. There's a lot of re-ups coming in 2019. There also may be some other opportunities if there's a market correction. And so trying to be cautious about deploying too much capital with where we are in the market. On the strategy side, with the structure study in January, these percentages changed. Buyout increased, special situations decreased. So special situations is still above the 5 to 15%. So we expect it's going to go down because we don't expect any special situations to be brought in the near term. And as those send capital back to you, that should go down and you make new commitments. On the geography side, basically everything's in in the guidelines. Asia and emerging markets is a little bit lower, but once, you did approve the new Asia fund late last year. We expect once that draws, you would get that there. On the concentration side, and these aren't hard guidelines on the concentration where, 10% exposure to a GP, if you're over that, you immediately initiate a secondary. It's more of a guideline on how to size investments as we bring it to you. And looking at what's the realization opportunities to make sure that one manager doesn't become overly influential in the overall performance. And there is one general partner that is greater than 10%, but they have generated a 15% net IRR. We've actually seen liquidity over the last 6 months from this manager, and so that's going down as more commitments are made. And then 5% upper exposure by fund series. There are 6 funds that are greater than 5, but all but one of them have generated at 14% net IRR or higher. So it is additive to the overall portfolio as well. And then we continue to look at the managers and try and get the manager count down. It has been a long process to get these legacy funds. You can see there's still 70 funds with a vintage year 2007 or older, and they still have 203 million value for you. So I mean, there's still a lot of value there that we continue to monitor. The hard thing is they're such a small size. If you were to do a secondary sale, you'd probably get a deep discount at this point. We are looking at these one-off opportunities where the manager, the limited partners together are going to the manager saying we want liquidity, and we're looking at those opportunities as they come up and seeking liquidity when we can. With that, I'll open up to questions.
Very good. And we, of course, are staying away from venture.
I wouldn't say we're staying away. The problem with venture is the really good venture, similar to kind of the Hellman and Friedman, the access. Venture funds tend to be smaller, and so getting a sizable allocation is difficult. And so there has been some good venture funds that we've talked to, but the maximum allocation we've been able to get is 20 million. And so we continue to talk about, is there a way to kind of get your foot in the door, 20 million, and then hopefully grow that to significant size over time. But that's the main reason why we haven't brought any venture capital funds to the national program.
Okay.
We continue to look.
Yes.
Thank you. Sun Mountain? Hi, good morning.
We're on the presentation. It starts on page 279. Sun Mountain is here to go over our performance solution program. We obviously have our birthday around the inside.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, everyone. I'd like to be respectful of your time today. What I would like to do is go through at a relatively high level some of the key highlights and performance numbers in the quarterly presentation, and then open up for any questions that y'all might have. So if you would turn with me to page 281, which is page 3 on the actual PDF in your document. Just overall program status. In the first quarter, the program net deployed capital of $288.9 million. That's versus the severance tax permanent fund statutory cap of $456 million. That allocation or that net deployed capital represents 5.7% of the severance tax permanent fund. As you know, the long-term allocation target is 5%, so we're a little bit above that. We'll talk about, and that's a couple of upcoming slides, some of the things that we see based on hearing from the GPs of the program about why we believe in 2019 we'll be back at that 5%. Also, the program has added 8 funds over the past few years, which highlights both an increase in the New Mexico investing activity and also, frankly, a much broader universe of qualified funds in which to look for potential investments, given the change in statute that happened a few years back. It's been very beneficial to this program. So now, turn looking to the next page. This is the financial performance, and I think this is no real news to the folks around this table, but this is really a tale of 2 different portfolios. The if you look at the overall aggregate performance for the 1, 3, 5 year, and also since inception, those numbers, if you peel back the onion layer, if you will, really tells the tale of the legacy portfolio before 2007 and the performance of that portfolio, and the since 2007 when Sun Mountain Capital became the manager, and again in every category, 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, and also since inception, there has been a significant difference in those two. So looking at the overall blended average, I think is a little bit, doesn't really represent what's really happened over the last 10 years or so. If you'll skip with me a couple pages to page 7 in the presentation, which is the pacing chart. Sure. Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned, we're currently at 5.7% with a long-term allocation of 5%. And when this pacing plan was originally put in place, there was a target of $30 to $35 million per year in annual commitments. If you go back over the last 4 years, the average deployment has been 35, so right in that range, right at the top end of that range. And we believe that the program is on pace to achieve this long-term allocation based on what we've seen from, number one, a number of the GPs reporting liquidation events in their portfolio, and as you're probably aware, there are oftentimes lockup periods through which they can actually liquidate their holdings, or they may have a plan in place to liquidate, so it just takes some time to actually unwind those positions. And also just what we see in our own portfolio and some of the things on the horizon. So, anyhow, we feel like we're going to be right on track for that 5%. We'll see that probably in 2019. And also, we have 4 prospective funds progressing through due diligence to keep us at that $30 to $35 million target that was established a few years back. Finally, just a quick update on Tranche 2017. We have essentially 1 new investment remaining that we made out of Tranche 2017. That is right on track for the pacing. As you may recall, we talked about Tranche 2017 being essentially 2 years to 2.5 years of investable capital based on what we had seen historically. And those 2 years are 2017, 2018. And so we will likely have a discussion in Q4 whether it makes sense for our Tranche 2019. If you'll now skip with me 2 pages, PDF page 9. This is just looking at the economic impact of the program in the first quarter of 2018. And you can see the second group of numbers. On the left column is the actual impact in the quarter, both in terms of New Mexico purchases and also payroll for employees in the state. And then we also have the second column, which is looking at the past 12 months, right, like a rolling 12-month total. And again, the impact is significant for the state. And finally, one of the metrics that we're proud of is the fact that these jobs are not just jobs, but they're actually well-paying jobs, given the nature of the industries that they're in. And as you can see from the average annual salary for those jobs, it's not quite double, but almost double what the state averages. Now just skip with me 2 pages, just a summary, and then we can open up for questions. As I had shown through some of the analysis, the program is currently tracking to the pacing plan that was approved by the SIC. Currently, we're slightly above, but again, given what's on the horizon and what we're hearing from the underlying portfolio fund managers, we believe we'll be at 5% or potentially lower than that come 2019. We're evaluating several new fund commitments for the program. Again, we found some highly qualified fund managers who have demonstrated a commitment and interest in the state of New Mexico. And finally, the financial performance is tracking to national benchmarks since 2007. And before 2007, that was not the case. So with that, I say thank you for your time, and if there are any questions, we'd do our best to do.
Lee, please.
Just want to jump back to your slide on your page 9. It's always a little frustrating, where we've got to carry forward this vintage, and we did the same thing with the real estate portfolio and everything else from, a decade ago. And it's kind of like, when do we get rid of that? But as long as we're gonna keep that in the equation, that, we've got some legacy, investments that aren't performing in various areas. I'm wondering that this 35 active companies is regardless of whether or not they're legacy or not. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I guess I'm just curious, is if we had, really 2 more columns here, we get 35 active companies, but how many of those are pre-2007 and post-2007? How many companies exited at the gain and loss at each of those? It just is a sidebar on those. It's certainly not going to affect the quarter 1 and the lower 2 boxes there, or sections, but it would be kind of instructive, as long as we're going to kind of keep throwing that out, that, hey, we've got some distinctions, we ought to be consistent and throw that in here. I'm not saying you're not, but it would be useful.
Sure.
So if
No,
we could maybe
understood.
update that at some point, it would be.
And thank you for those comments. We can take a look at that. One of the things that we've explored, to your point, is to see if we can potentially package some of those earlier funds into a secondary, right? Like we did with real estate. And unfortunately, many of the positions we have are so small. They're small investments and small funds. It's very, very difficult. The prospect that even if we can find interest, we would be looking at a very significant haircut. And it's not clear whether that's in the best interest of the program.
Right. Those would be, at least that's information I find of interest sometimes. So maybe emails would.
Okay, are there any other questions? So you're going to make some.
On the program where you're helping us to liquidate those orphan companies that we get distributed, has there been any action in the last quarter?
There's been no action in the last quarter on that.
Nobody wants it.
Catalyst fund, any comments on the catalyst fund?
If I could just ask one more question on this one. Are the values that are reflected in the numbers for the legacy portfolio realistic? In other words, you're saying a bunch of dinky ones and the whole thing, are the numbers that are there realistic?
We rely largely on audited financials and then discussions with the general partners to determine if those valuations are realistic or not. And we believe they are, because now that portfolio is anywhere from 10 to 20 years old, the companies that are there are established and have revenues, and they are there are much more clear ways to value those companies than if they were just a pre-revenue startup.
We keep them on the books at a level that they are, where they are right now.
That's correct.
That's a number, obviously.
Right.
And
Right.
if you're saying that it's difficult to sell them, back in the world where I existed, the only thing that really told you value was what you could get for it, what you could actually do. And you're saying it would take a significant haircut probably to dump these, just to dump them. I have a little bit of a problem with that value versus the book value. In other words, if in my mind, the real value is what you could get for them if you dump them, not what they're on. And I think I share some of Lee's feelings about this, and that is, I sure would like to just see that stuff jettisoned. Even if it required the 13% of the portfolio in value at this particular point in time. Not suggesting it because I'm not financially astute enough to know the total effect. But it seems to me it sure would be nice to get that stuff going.
It's been effective in our other programs. I mean, to your point, the reallocation of that capital, right, to better performing investments.
Yeah,
is very beneficial.
So if you only got 20% of it back, put it into something that's going to make money instead of something that's going to continue to deteriorate. So I'd certainly like to see us have a discussion about that.
It's a worthwhile discussion. We don't value any other part of the portfolio on liquidation value either, so.
No, I understand. But I'm talking about the realistic side of what it is.
And we also have an audit, so we have an issue with our auditors, I suppose, if we're trying to do that.
Yeah.
But, if we wanted to talk about what that value might be here, it might be useful to do that.
Yes.
The question.
Well, I was just trying to follow up. How much do we think total is in that portfolio?
We have that on page,
I'm sorry.
page 3. It's $48 million, 13% of the total value.
15?
13%.
48 million.
I'm just wondering if you can either sell it or gift it to the ERA or PERA. It's still a state agency. Let's take the loss and run.
That's real nice.
But just a little color, how would you characterize these companies? Are they zombies, are they walking dead, are they just
And then write it up.
generating good salaries for the management teams who are doing just fine, or, you know?
It's really a mixed bag. And it's, in these portfolios, it's a little bit like, if you ever bought a pack of baseball cards when you were growing up, there was one star player and there's 9 others who are sort of, the walking dead or zombies. And those portfolios are like that. There's usually 1 or 2, interesting companies that still have upside, and then there are a bunch of other ones that the GPs are doing whatever they can to try to package them up and sell them.
We have a list of all those companies in that material, so we can see what's wrong. Rather interest, it's there.
And yet some of those legacy companies were still funding and making additional contributions. Like Cox, for example.
Virtually all those legacy companies at this point are self-sufficient, or because we're not providing any additional capital calls to those older funds, right? They're beyond their investment period.
Well, I'm looking at, maybe I'm not understanding what I'm looking at, but it's our page 305, it's your page. This is under the co-investment. I don't know what page it is for you guys, it's not on here. But it shows contributions / significant investment. It talks about this comment where we made, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 contributions. So we're still putting money into that. If it's a contribution, that means we're still putting money into them, correct? Am I reading that right?
No, that's correct.
So if you have that firm and it's been out there since however long and we've lost all of our investment, why would we keep throwing money into it?
No, that is a good question. There are a couple of instances in the portfolio where some of those companies are very close to an exit, very close to being months. And for whatever reason, they need some capital to make the transaction actually take place. And so there will be instances where there is some additional funding going into those companies. But it's quite, as you can see from the amounts going into common, it's quite small.
Let me ask a different question. If we essentially lost all of our original investment, why would we contribute any more to them? I guess is my thought. And maybe there's a good reason, because you're talking about you're trying to find a potential buyer, maybe you're kind of dragging it on until you find that buyer, but it seems to me like the likelihood of getting any of those follow-on contributions back, let alone our original principal, is 0. So at some point in time, you have to kind of exit regardless of what your loss is.
Now, there is a belief that those follow-on contributions will not only be returned, but returned with some profit, which will help mitigate the loss on the original investment. If there was a belief that any additional investment capital would not be returned with some gain, then the decision would be to simply not fund.
Thank you.
Anything else? Terrific. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Updating you on current status of a couple of things. The total distributions that have been made over the past 12 months, 911 million. West Texas Intermediate closed at $68.92 yesterday. And our net asset value is almost up to our high watermark, which was 24.48 billion as of the end of January. Today, we're at 24.415 billion. And as we all know, the higher that goes, eventually, the distribution should increase also. You have the September meeting dates for the council as well as the investment committee shown on my report. All of you are aware of the good news that came out of the LFC analysts, or I should say economists, one of whom is sitting in the room right now. Dawn, thank you for the good news that we have an estimated additional amount of new money coming in, 1.2 billion. And the thing that I find so interesting, in addition to that, is the fact that this rainy day fund that the legislature was correct in establishing may have an estimated contribution amount of about $177 million. Duffy, is that right?
Between 135 and 180. Volumes and price.
My question to you, Duffy, and to you, Dawn, and anyone else who is listening, is how does the state plan to have those funds invested? And if there is enough stability to have those funds invested in more than a short-term fashion, is there any desire to have the SIC discuss that with whomever makes that decision? So at some point, Dawn, do you have any comment on that? Tell everybody who you are.
My name is Dawn Iglesias. I'm an economist with the LFC and a member of the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. Right now, I think that it's going to be held at the State Treasurer's Office. I have not heard discussions on what future investment potential might be for that, but I would imagine that there would be openness to those discussions, considering that with distributions from the oil and gas school tax that we expect, along with any excess distributions from the operating reserve that exceed 8% at the end of the fiscal year, that fund has potential to grow quite large, comparable to our budget, and surely we would want to make the best decision with those funds. I would be happy to coordinate a meeting with representatives of SIC and some of our members to initiate those discussions, as well as with Secretary Rodriguez and anyone else who would want to be present on those.
I think those meetings would be extremely important and useful going forward. I do believe, if my memory serves me correctly, we took a statutory change to do that. And so I think, we need to meet on that. I think that would be a wise move on the part of the state, similar to the tobacco fund, to have it long-term with SIC.
We're happy to meet and discuss anything you wish. Thank you. Lynn?
Can you just refresh my understanding of how the fund is funded and what the plan is for use of the fund?
So there's no specific plan for use of the fund except to protect the state against further downturns, and particularly from the oil and gas industry, but any economic downturn. It's a 5-year average of volumes, price, and Dawn, correct me if I'm missing something here, of volumes and price for oil and gas. And that's what, because of the boom in the Permian, what has triggered the flow of funds into that particular fund far in advance of what we anticipated even a year ago. So the estimators have pinned about 135 to 170, 180 million dollars will flow into the fund during FY19, and then 177 potentially after that. So it will grow exponentially if volumes and price remain the same. And it's there to protect the state against what we just went through, and a supermajority of the legislature has to vote to open up the fund and use it for specific purposes.
Is there any intention of tying it to reserve levels or nothing that, everything that?
No, it's the 5-year average of volumes and price, so that if we spike and crash, then we can use that rainy day fund. Don?
The only thing that I would add is there is another mechanism for funds to flow into that rainy day fund, and we do anticipate that to trigger in FY18 and FY19 is if the operating reserve, which gets funding by the amount of revenue received in excess of the budget for that year, will then go to the operating reserve. If the operating reserve exceeds 8%, then whatever is in excess of that 8% will flow into the tax stabilization reserve, along with the distribution from the oil and gas school tax, which is a function of volumes and price. It's a set percentage on that value of oil, gas, and other minerals. So those are two mechanisms through which money will flow into the fund. We expect at the end of FY19 for that fund to sit at about $1 billion, about 20%, a little more than 20% of reserves. Now, granted, that is if no additional one-time appropriations are made by the legislature in FY19, which is a possibility. So this is an estimate based on current oil price and volume expectations, what we think total revenues for the state would be generated, and if no additional appropriations are made, how much would be in excess of the 8% cap of the operating reserve. And Secretary Rodriguez is absolutely correct. Once it goes into the tax stabilization reserve, there are only two mechanisms to get funding out, either a supermajority of the legislature, 2/3 vote in the House and Senate, or a declaration by the governor of an emergency, and then it only requires a simple majority. And typically, that emergency has to be declared if it's determined that revenues will not be able to pay for the budget for that year.
Can I ask a question on that? Do you know how they came up with limiting the operating reserve to only 8%? Because by having it that small, isn't that going to drive them to have to open up this emergency fund more often?
I am honestly not aware of what was the driving factor for that 8% cap. What I can say is there was a mechanism for funding to flow into a more permanent, harder to reach reserve in the event, because the operating reserve requires no special legislation in order to use that. The tax stabilization reserve does. There was once a cap on the tax stabilization reserve and at 6% of the total budget, and if that 6% was exceeded, then anything left over would actually go back to a fund that was required to be redistributed to taxpayers. The 2017 legislation took away that 6% cap and the redistribution fund, in essence making this a fund that would then be able to grow and be used on a more long-term basis. But I think it's simply a function of what should the legislature be able to access quickly and immediately versus what would require more thought and planning and consensus in order to target those additional funds.
Thank you.
And that approach, Mr. Chairman, is what is, can't think of the right word right now, but it's what Moody's really likes about how we set up this rainy day fund. That it hits that 8% in the operating reserve, as Don said. Because otherwise it would be, okay, we got to 10%, we don't have to save any more money in our reserves. And right now we're saying we need at least 20 at a minimum.
20%.
Yeah.
Tim?
Okay, looking at all that, right now, the state has about a $300 million lawsuit. I don't know if anybody's writing in education that they're losing, and then there's another one on special ed they're gonna lose probably. And so there's at least 400 million, I think, isn't that? I mean, I don't know how much of the 1.2 billion is reoccurring. But in that lawsuit, if somebody does an appeal, pretty quick, you're gonna get stuck with a lawsuit. I think for it's about 300 or 350, and then the special ed was about 100 million on top of that. And
as I recall. I mean,
Right now, we don't have any estimate from the feds on the special ed situation. And the court case on equitably funding education did not assign a dollar amount. And that's one of the issues that policymakers are having with the decision. It just said, well, you're not doing it right. And it didn't say what dollar amount would make it right. So that's what people in the executive and legislature are struggling with right now.
That'd be recurring as well, too. That's recurring funds.
Well,
The 300.
yeah, you get into that. I mean, you get into operation money that's gonna be recurring, I would think. I mean, it's not that much about the buildings that are bad. We pretty much fixed all the buildings and stuff. It's all about operational money.
It would be recurring expenditures, hopefully to the classroom, right? That's the whole point of this. But again, there was no direction on the part of the judiciary as to what's the perfect dollar amount, what's the ideal dollar amount.
Yeah, there's some huge deals in there because if you put any of it in salaries, it only compounds our deficit that we owe for the ERA and ERA. I mean, those are just gonna be, those are just, you know, you pay the final 5 years for education, so you put that in salaries and you're gonna pay people for the next 30 years till they die. But how much of the 1.2 billion is gonna be reoccurring? Is there any way to come up with that?
Mr. Chairman, Member Jennings, we're still looking at that. That's a call that the consensus group doesn't necessarily make. They're the economists. So it winds up being more a policy decision than anything else. And how much of that, we do know a substantial portion of that is from oil and gas, which probably should be looked upon as, for the most part, non-recurring and not recurring. There's a good core growth to the economy based on things that this administration has done, the smaller level, but it's growing at a slow and steady pace. So those sorts of things we can count on as recurring, but we have to be very careful with the oil and gas revenue.
And just on that, you know, when you look about the West Texas crude, in some areas, I mean, they're charging $17, $18 a barrel to get the oil out of there. I mean, they're training it, they're taking oil to the trains, and the ones that used to use frac sand are now loading oil in the tank cars to get out of there. $17 or $18 is a pretty significant hit, and I don't know about our investing, if we invest in the Mexico stuff, but pipelines sure might help a little bit.
Mr. Chair, Member Jennings, I know that there are several companies who are investing literally billions of dollars in pipelines to move New Mexico's product, out of state. But one of the other interesting issues about recurring and non-recurring is we used to be able to sit around the table in the consensus group and say, West Texas is $30 a barrel, ours is maybe 26, 25. It was about a $4 differential for years, and now it's 12 or 13. And so the whole landscape has changed between what's going on in the Permian and then the price, the volumes that have increased and then the prices.
Okay, thank you. Interesting discussion, thank you, all of you. Under operations, we are about to offer a position to a new IT network administrator to work with David. And I know David is looking forward to that. Particularly since we didn't have internet service for almost 2 days at the office. And all of you knew that because you didn't get your materials as a result of that. And I understand the governor's office had their issues yesterday. And still.
It was the Russians.
So I think it's Aubrey's turn. Inflows from the state land office have been superb. Looking back at the high monthly inflow of October 2014, 73.9 million. For July, we had a $72 million inflow. Commissioner, do you have any comments? I know you've spoken about this. I think it's interesting.
I have a lot of comments, depends what you want to talk about. You want to talk about pipelines, you want to talk about inflows. I mean, I was in Lee County last week, there's 50 rigs operating, not Lee County, Ada County, and there's 50 rigs operating just in Ada County alone right now. That is where the epicenter of the new find is, in my opinion. Devon's got 2 wells over 8,000 barrels per day. EOG has one bigger than that. If you look at the technology that's going into the horizontal fracturing, it's getting even better and better in what's coming out. The 2 big issues still are water, fresh water and produced water. But from the land office standpoint, we produced more oil and citrus lands last month than we ever have. So we're approaching 7 million barrels per month. We're estimating $80 million in revenue at current production and royalty revenue to the SIC based on 7 million barrels and $60 oil. So we're saying that you have a possibility of getting $960 million next year, or the current year we're in. We've had 2 oil sales this month. We're over, one was at 12 and one was at 15 bonus sales. So we're on track to have a record year. The problem is with the election coming up and the current leading candidate looks like it will probably be against fracturing and fracking. So there's a chance that we will not hit our targets based on the election. My office ends December 31st. So, it's unbelievable what's happening down there. If anyone hasn't been to Carlsbad, they need to go. It is unreal what's happening down there. We were in Walmart a couple months ago. We were overnighting. We wanted to get our lunches for the next day. It looked like a Katrina disaster. There were 6 cases of water left. We got the last bag of oranges, and there was no roast beef. But if you go to Carlsbad, the problem is that infrastructure is not there. 2 weeks ago, 5 people were killed in car accidents in Ada County alone, and 3 kept separate car wrecks. You're losing at least 1 person a week between Pecos and Loving. And we've gone in, we're probably gonna have an accident in one of our cars. We had one last week, but we put flags on all of our pickups and we put safety lights. We're putting everybody through dispensing driving twice a year. But, the thing we need, if you want to continue this production, we need new highways and infrastructure. Housing is, you can rent anything in Carlsbad. Yeah. People are sleeping in their trucks. It's just amazing. So then you talk about pipelines. There's a 1.5 mile area east of the Blackbird, of the Delaware River on the Texas state line, that's state trust lands. There's BLM on each side of us. They're too hard to get a FERC line through. We have to go through NEPA. We've probably got, 12 lines already existing, 12 inches and higher. We've got 5 pending that are beating on our door every day for us to approve. One example is Plains Matador pipeline, crude pipeline. It's going to be 24 inch. We'll probably grant it this week. They'll probably get construction in 90 days. It takes 150 trucks off the road, just one pipeline. So the problem is they're saying the takeaway won't, based on current production growth, there won't be enough pipeline to get product out by the end of next year. So even with the new lines being put in. So it's just unreal what's happening. And I would say the $1 billion too all comes from oil and gas, whether it's Severn, Prairie Rock, sales tax, room rates, vehicle titles, whatever. All that 1.2 billion is gonna be tied back to the growth in southeastern Mexico.
In Carlsbad, there's not a business in Carlsbad that doesn't have a help wanted sign on the door. And it doesn't, you can talk about jobs all you want, there's all kinds of jobs out there, there's just nobody to fill them. And it doesn't matter in our bank, you can't get people to work. People are gone, they've gone to bigger bucks and they do another thing, but it's,
You can get branch manager.
it's really a problem. And when you go down, you go into Loving, and see Allsup's. And once you go in there, it's the busiest store I've ever seen in my life. It's busier than Walmart and Roswell or anything, just Allsup's. And they're filling up trucks, diesel fuel, they're filling everything. It's unbelievable. And, people have no idea. And one frac job is 110 car train. To do one frac job at 2,000 pounds a foot. Right? And sometimes they're going at 2,500 pounds a foot. Per foot of valuable stuff. 500 trucks. It's 20 million pounds of sand.
For one well, and there's 50 wells going. 50 rigs.
And there's, one train will do one well. 110 per train. They are getting sand now, they're getting it from Kermit, Texas. Before it was all coming from Wisconsin. But this Kermit, the frac sand in Kermit appears to be hard enough to hold, strong enough to hold the formations open. And so they're getting that, but like I say, that's gonna be 500 trucks coming from Kermit. Because a truck can haul 40 to 50,000 pounds, if they don't get caught.
Before the issue of water has such a dampening effect on that, given where we're at and the lack of water as a state generally speaking, and these wells require a lot of that. How do they resolve that?
I think you're going to recycling. EOG is doing about 50% recycled water in the frac jobs now. There's some talking about not using water and going to different technology. The problem is the produced water is almost bigger than the fresh. By 2025, produced water coming out with the oil in a year will be the amount it takes to fill the whole thing.
Wow.
Just 2 million acre feet.
They inject that weight back deep into the ground, is that true?
They inject it until it pressurizes and get earthquakes and they'll stop doing it. So no one knows how much most of the water's going in sand there is. So no one knows when those pressure rise. So when those pressures. That's why it's been such a hit. I've been on the water issue so much because it could be the limiting factor in production.
Thank you. I think it's important for people north of Eddy and Chaves counties to know what's going on with the issue.
I think they're talking about 2 million total in roads and a small portion going to Eddy and Lee.
It all needs to go.
Yes, because that's where
The accidents are.
Little kid 3 doors down from me got killed. Colleen Monson, she was a representative at church time. He got killed, and they were just going down the road. One semi hit the rear end of another one. The first semi's trailer came off, went over the front of it. But it happens all the time. JJ.
When you talk about cattle ranching, I don't think there'll be cattle ranching south of Loving, east of the Texas line.
Just too much activity.
Within the next 5 years, the ranches are all selling out. The destruction of the surface is pretty drastic.
Thank you. That segues a bit into external relations. Charlie and I are going to be traveling into southern and southeastern New Mexico this fall. And I think we're going to take tents and big rolls, Charlie. We better pack a lunch.
Are you going to get on rigs and track jumps?
I think we're going to be doing our best to Well, one, we want to see what's going on down there, and two, continue our education about the funds and what they do.
That would be
Also
good.
saying thank you.
That would probably be Sean. Here we again.
I think you should do it.
Sign me up.
Sign me up.
And Paul would like to go. Yeah. No, we'll let you know. The main purpose for our trip, and this, Charlie, let's just go into this. The main purpose for our trip is to continue to do what you have asked us to do now for many years, and that's to better educate New Mexicans about the permanent funds. So one of the mechanisms for educating, you all each received in the mail recently. And Charlie, would you talk about our 60th anniversary report?
Sure, so you should have seen one of these, should have arrived in your office or at your home. This is a document we produced internally. Staff worked on it for many months and thought about something like this for a while. Our new analyst, Jeremy Gibbons-Porter, had some excellent, not only artistic, but desktop publishing skills, and was the driving force behind the document. I think it captures a lot of interesting history behind not only the permanent fund, but the 60 years that the council has been around. Including history, and that includes good history and some bad history in there too, but it's all important, and I think it's going to be a tool that we're going to use, and we're happy with the way it came out. We welcome any feedback, because we may end up doing another version at some point. But anyways, thank you for your contributions to the document, and again, we welcome any feedback.
Excellent document. Commissioner, thank you for once offering to have someone in your office help us put this together. We were lucky to find Jody, and she is a real pro at this, but we appreciated the fact that you offered that.
One thing you might check, we just did a video on the state land office. I don't know if people have seen it.
Yes, we included that in a weekly, maybe a month and a half ago. We've seen it, Laura Riley, she mentioned that when I met with her a few months ago, and thanked her for that. I thought it was very well done. And I would encourage, maybe I'll put it in this week's weekly just to remind people.
Thank you. We met with the Albuquerque Journal just on the 22nd of this month. Charlie and I spent almost 2 hours with the editorial board. Had a very worthwhile exchange. These people are supportive of what we do, of what you do with permanent funds, and couldn't ask for a more receptive group. We're going to be meeting with both the Republican and Democratic parties in Bernalillo County. The Republican Party has invited us to meet with them, and we're reaching out to the Democratic Party to discuss the permanent funds. And we're also working with Los Alamos. We haven't been there yet, and we do want to go there. That's my report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Please, the question on this whole issue of the 1.2 billion is how much of that really would flow into the severance tax permanent fund that wasn't diverted on the front end? I know we know what we're getting with the 960 million that you're talking about from the land commission, from the land office. But it seems to me that the severance taxes are being diverted into this so-called rainy day fund, which is really an effort to keep it away from us because they can't get it back out. But I'm just wondering how much would flow to us if either Jeff or our analyst know.
Charlie might have an idea on this.
So, actually, Don had sent me something yesterday about this. And as you know, after last year's $38 or $37.77 that we got the current calendar year, we did receive a nice $117 million injection. The reason for that mostly is boom years, the mechanics of how they establish how much capacity they have for bonding. Boom years don't
capture all the funds, and so we get a nice bump. So 117 this year, but the estimates by the Board of Finance also look pretty healthy the next several years. The next 5 years out, it looks like $80–90 million, far more than the average, which is closer to 30 to 40 historically.
Yeah, they can still bond against it, right?
They can, and they can sponge it, and there are ways to get around it, but.
They can bond against it, put the roads down there.
Very, very correct.
Dawn, would you?
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to clarify that when we say severance taxes for this purpose, we're really talking about two different things. There is the actual severance tax, and that is the funding source for both the bonding fund and then ultimately the permanent fund for whatever is not bonded against. The amount that's being diverted into the rainy day fund is not from the severance tax. It's from the oil and gas school tax, which we identify as one of our various severance taxes. It operates in much of the same way, but it is a different tax, and that has typically just gone to the general fund and is appropriated annually and never goes to any permanent fund. And what is happening now is we're saying because that source can spike and drop based on oil price and production levels, instead, they're going to take a rolling 5-year average, and instead of putting it in the general fund where it would go, they're going to take whatever is above that 5-year average and put it into this rainy day fund instead. But that's not the same as saying that it would go to the permanent fund, but isn't instead, because the severance tax is the actual severance tax is the one that goes to the bonding fund and then the permanent fund.
What's the difference in those two rates?
The severance tax rate is 3.75%, I believe, and the emergency school tax rate is 4.1%. Please don't quote me on that, but if I'm remembering correctly, it's about 4%.
Okay. I think we're now ready for, Karen. And actually, I'll start off with the audit committee report.
Please.
We did meet yesterday, at quorum. Myself and Jim Goodwin were there. We covered the current budget update, and we spent a lot of time talking about the appropriation for 2020. We also spent a bit of time talking about our compliance program and the success to date so far of our fee consultant. Comor. And that looks to be like a positive undertaking, possibly to have some payback for us. We'll see how that pencils out over the next few quarters, but that's, we're pleased with the progress we're making so far. So that's really all I have from the audit committee.
And I'll be very brief. Just a few things I wanted to point out. On page 338 is where I'm at. I've said this before, this time of the year is usually super busy. I just finished out a fiscal year 18, rolled on a new fiscal year 19, and we're doing an appropriation request for fiscal year 20. So we have 3 fiscal years, seems like going all at once. On page 338 is the July budget schedule for fiscal year 19. The only thing I wanted to point out on this schedule is within the 200 category, which is the upper part of that schedule. If you look at the far right column, it shows 48,000. We have currently 5 positions that are unfunded. The 48,000 is indicating to me that our budget this year, fiscal year 19, is going to be rather tight. And then as it relates to contractual services in the 300s, even though we're showing currently after 1 month savings of $5.6 million, I would expect by the end of the fiscal year, we'll probably need a bar in the range of $2 to $5 million based upon the actual appropriation we got for
fiscal year 19. And then if you go to page 343, as Steve already pointed out, and this is at the end of July, gives you a little bit of a feel for where we're at, $24.3 billion. I mentioned this just because, as Steve says, we continue to kind of approach the high. And then if you go to I think it's 349.
Let me just make it, I'm not showing these pages and what was sent to me. So I can't track it at all. Maybe it's on that, whatever the one is.
Diligent.
Maybe it's on that one, but it didn't get on the email.
It's not
So I
on the
can't
email.
track it.
Not the PDF.
Yeah, but I don't use that.
Oh, okay.
So I use the email version.
Yeah.
So I'm not being able to follow any of this.
All right, I apologize. I'm trying to figure out how we might be able to rectify that in the future.
Right.
Get everybody on the same page.
Everybody
I don't
use
know
the
what-
email version.
Everybody use the email version. Well, I want to make one other comment, and then I'll go to the handout. Everybody able to follow on the handout. I did want to point out on the very last page of the investment holdings report, which are the notes. And this adds to the prior discussion that we had. And I think it's important to note, just for comparative purposes, I think Steve mentioned that our inflows for July were $72 million. Just to give you a point of reference, July of the prior year was $42 million. So we've gone from 42 to 72 in a year's time, from 1 year to the next. So that's also very impressive. And lastly, I think everybody has this handout, which is the appropriation request. Should have just gotten it. And I think I emailed that to everybody as well. I apologize for the delay. I think some of the delay was due to the fact that we were down 2 days last week because of the fiber line being cut. So I did want to point out on the appropriation request, if you look at this request, especially the first 2 pages, you have not only fiscal year 18 operating budget, fiscal year 18 actual, we have fiscal year 19 information, and the appropriation request for fiscal year 20. The fiscal year 18 actuals, if you go to that on page 2, you can see that the actuals for fiscal year 18, $52.4 million. These are pre-audit numbers. We're still dealing with auditors, and we'll be dealing with them. And I would expect this number to come down just a little bit. But what I did want to point out is if you look at the operating budget, you might say, well, the actuals exceed the operating budget. You know, how could that possibly happen? The operating budget that is reflected there does not reflect the $2.6 million bar that we got right before year end. And I was a little uneasy about where we're going to end the fiscal year. Got an operating or a bar actually completed for $2.6 million. If you recall, June kind of pulled back a little bit in the markets. So by the time the audit is done, I'll probably say that we didn't need that bar because of the pullback in June. But at the time that we did it, it was based upon that information that we actually had.
Do we have a rainy day fund now?
And I'm sure everybody understands this, but I continue to point it out. We are funded from the land grant permit fund and the severance tax permit fund. So even though we got that bar, didn't use the bar, we'll transfer it right back into the land grant and the severance tax. And then I wanted to refer everybody to that last page, which is page 5. This is my fee estimator that we use year after year. For fiscal year 20, the appropriation request material that you have in front of you. I'm estimating based upon assumptions that I made, and this was done within 2 standard deviations in the mean, about $48.8 million of fees. This is public market fees for fiscal year 20. If you recognize the fact that fiscal year 20 is almost a full 2 years, the end of fiscal year 20 is almost a full year, 2 years out, you realize that it's very difficult to make these estimates, but we do the actual work and the best that we can in making the estimates. So we're estimating $48 million. This is a pretty good increase over the prior year, but based upon the current allocations that we have in assets, this is what we think is going to be needed. What else did I want to add? For fiscal year 20, other than that, the public market fees is the majority of the actual appropriation request. Everything else is fairly stable with the exception of the 200 category. We are asking and hope to receive full funding for our 5 unfilled positions. If we do that, I think we'll be able to fill a couple of them, 2 to 3 of them right away. I know Vince has some needs and I have some needs. We are a fairly small office based upon the assets that we have, and getting some additional help in-house, I think will be helpful going forward. Other than that, I answer any questions that you might have.
What's the fees you pay Spall?
Say that again?
The fees you pay Spall, about $2,000 a month, what do we have to pay them for?
That is outsourced human resources services. They perform our HR services for us, and we pay them a fee for that.
They don't have an internal HR function.
They charge everybody across all state agencies the same type of thing?
Most state agencies.
Oh, I realize that. Thank you.
Yes, yes, and it's, we've had that for a while, and if you recall, SPO has kind of consolidated some of the human resource services from all the agencies, so I think they're still working out some of the, how they're.
I'm sure that fee will happen.
Yeah, the fee might go up in the future, but it is an estimate, so that's what that is.
In the future on these, I just looked at the glasses. Do you think you can get us magnifying glasses? I think about 30.
I apologize for that. I know one of the things that I do like about Diligent is I can blow these up, and it is better to see when I blow it up. And like many of you, I'm kind of losing my sight too. It's getting worse as I get older, and I apologize. I'll try to do better on that. And then I did want to also point out, because we are, and I think probably the only person that might be familiar with this is Scott. Hopefully he is. There was, for upcoming audit, an interim deadline for the audited financial statements of October 15th. That October 15th interim deadline has been removed. It is no longer applicable. Our due date for the audit report is November 21st. We are planning an exit conference with the auditors on November 1st, which is almost a full 3 weeks ahead of that. So I think we're well ahead of the curve as far as the audit is concerned. We have our new auditors already beginning to select samples. They've done planning, and I would expect this audit to go as well as past audits, even though, as all of you probably know, with the new audit firm, it is a little bit challenging to get them up and running and training on new tools and other things that we got going on. But other than that, I think the only thing is I guess the appropriation request is a voting item, so we need to take care of that.
Steve. I just want the council to know that Brent does a very thorough job of interviewing all of us in order to put this appropriation request together. There's no path in this request. And we were cut back severely last year from what we requested for no reason whatsoever having to do with the way we operate. And my hope would be that this year, the committee or committees that make those decisions will think twice before they cut our appropriation request, knowing that we try to operate a very tight ship. And that we need every dollar that we're asking for, and we need flexibility in the event that our investments perform extra well, and we need to pay more for that.
Let me just add, I was gonna wait till after we approve the motion, but I wanna add that, we consistently get communication from Brent and from the council, from Steve and from your staff about the audit process. I'm not on the audit committee, I'm not an accountant. Yeah, no thanks. I'm not an accountant, and those things are kind of, I don't have the little green hat and the white light that you're supposed to have and the pocket protector. But anyway, I think that I just want to make sure that every single time since Brent came on board, no findings, no problems with any of the outside auditors, no internal problems. And I think that we need to recognize Brent. I just want to make sure we appreciate the work that he does. What you do is largely unseen. You're behind the scenes. You're not out, beating a drum. And I think that but the thing about it is that as soon as something goes wrong, then you're out in front, being dragged by the drum. But I just think it's important that we appreciate the work you do. And I mean that sincerely, because every time I get one of those letters that says no findings, I'm thinking that's just awesome.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Say run a tight ship.
Yeah, a Brent ship.
Unintended.
The last item we have on.
Yes.
Please.
That's what I did. The last item we have on Brent's section.
I got a question on the budget. I'm trying to understand, we've got a 16.2% increase in the budget.
Yes.
Actually 16.3. Contractual services is up exactly the same percent. Is that what is our asset base up over that same period?
Well, I can tell you this, Lee, to actual, the exact percentage, I can't tell you off the head, but I can do the calculation. I can tell you the piece that you're missing for fiscal year 19 as you make a comparison between fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 is the fact, and I try to start my comments with this, we're anticipating probably a $2 to $5 million bar for fiscal year 19.
Well, say another way, the budget that we proposed for 19
Yes.
was cut back beyond our control without any substance because it depends on our investment. So if you're going to compare it to the budget, that's why you're getting those huge increases.
Right, and if you work in the bar into fiscal year 19, let's say $4 million, and then make that comparison, that increase is much more reasonable. To get to your question, if you turn to that fee estimator, that last page, you can see, and there's some margin of error. I'm trying to estimate this within some certain confidence level. But if you look, you have that green box, that's 2 standard deviations. I estimate, and this might be a low estimate for fiscal year 19, the assets end at $25.2 million. That $25.2 million relative to 24.4 where we're at now might be a little low. And then based upon the calculation of the 2 standard deviations for fiscal year 20, and this is the high end, we're trying to budget according to making sure that we have enough. Based upon 2 standard deviations, it has assets at about $32 billion. We might very well be less than that, but I'm trying to make sure that for fiscal year 20, we actually have enough dollars to cover anything that might happen in the market. If the market pulls back, we're probably going to have excess funds and we'll revert those back at the end of the audit. But that's basically how the calculation works. Further to your question, if you look at, the $48 million, I have a calculation of the fees and basis points based upon the actual projections that I did and the fee schedules, about 23 basis points. This year for the public market assets, we ended at about 26.2. So the fees and the makeup of the fees within this calculation is going down a little bit. I think we're going to less risky and less costly strategies, and that's what's driving that. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, I can certainly get you some additional information after the meeting.
Okay, the other concern is we have a 53% increase in classified full-time staff. Now, I know that we're talking about an IT guy, right? That's one. We talked about maybe filling 4 of the FTEs that aren't funded, but we can still do some bars to do some of that. But when we go from 1.2 to 1.9 million just in classified staff, and then yet we're reducing our exempt staff from 1.5 to 1.4. So are we having some classification changes because of administration changes, expectations, or even if we're adding 5 people, you know, I mean, that's just the salary, not even counting the benefits. So it's not like we can say each of those people is making $100,000.
Yeah.
But what's
To your question on the salaries, I think largely on the salaries on the unfilled positions, they're budgeted at midpoint, whatever the related position is. So this is actually what comes out of ERS, and we don't input those numbers. It's something that is driven by information that we get from DFA. But the fluctuation within the 200s, as I mentioned earlier, is largely due to the fact that we're trying to fill some positions that are not filled at this point in time because we don't have funding. And there has been some, to your question about why is it decreasing in the GovX positions, we have recently. His position is one of the unfilled, so I think that's impacting the calculation as well.
Okay, but this past year, okay, look at the 18 versus the 19. The 18 is actual. The 17 is, okay, we're not the 17, but the 19. Now, we had the big bump from the 1.186 operating to the actual 1.464 because we moved an individual to classified. Okay? I mean, from classified to exempt. I understand what we did there.
Okay.
And that whole story is not on here. But now we're gonna drop that back down. So, okay, I'm like, why do we have virtually, you know, almost 40% of our people are in classified is one thing that concerns me. But because we don't have the number of FTEs on here. So it's hard to relate. No, but not on the line. I mean, I don't know how many exempt FTEs. I thought we probably only had about 4, maybe we have 8, I don't know. But when I look at the total staff, it's like, why, number one question is, why is the exempt gone down in value and amount?
Okay.
Have we reduced the number of exempt employees?
No, we have not,
Then why is that compensation going down?
because of vacancies.
But you're gonna fill the vacancy. So you want it in the budget.
You're gonna fill the concept.
We are, and I can try to get you some additional information on this lead afterwards. I don't have the exact salary information in front of me, but I'm happy to provide you some additional information.
Okay, because, I mean, if we're only adding 5 people, okay, our 52,300 classified full-time jumps 53%. So, I mean, that's unrealistic to me, just to add 5 people to have a 53% increase on one lineup.
Yeah, and I think that, like I pointed out earlier, Lee, I think that increase is largely due to the fact that we have 5 positions right now for fiscal year 19 that aren't funded.
Okay, but how many do we have that are funded?
31 minus 5, so that'd be 26.
Yeah, but part of that 26 is exempt. How many is classified?
There's, as far as GovX positions, the entire management team, and then all the asset class directors are largely GovX.
So those are exempt. So how many exempts do we have?
So your management team, 26, let's say 18 probably.
18 exempt?
Are you talking GovX, or are you talking class?
Well, what you classify is 52,100, top one.
Okay.
Permanent exempt, FT and part-time.
Yeah, there's probably about 10 there.
So we got 10 there, and then the rest of them are gonna fall under the 52,300.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
And
sir.
so that's gonna be 16.
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
Yes,
And
sir.
then it gives you 5 vacancies you're trying to fill that are gonna go to that 16.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm still confused as to if we have 10 exempts and maybe we have 9,
Okay.
but the intention would be to fill that same position, right?
Yes.
So why would the compensation go down?
I think it probably might be just kind of a mismatch because we have a person right now in a Wazel position that was in a classified position.
Well, Brent, I'm wondering if the software fills those positions at mid-year rather than for the whole year.
Yeah, I can't answer that. And I can tell you, I can tell you this. I mean, it's just a matter of, I mean, these numbers are driven by what we get from DFA. We're not messing with it. I mean, we're not trying to make changes other than requesting funding for positions that are unfunded.
Yeah, but we are requesting next year's budget, and you're asking me to support a budget that's a 16% increase.
Yes.
That's a little difficult. And so I'm trying to understand where this is coming from, and the large part, 20% is coming from employment services. Now, I understand that, okay, we've got more assets, we want to expand, we're gonna maybe bring things in-house, maybe we'll raise it, but they're still having a hard time with 53% in one classification. I can't justify that in my mind. When I'm asked, I can't support that increase. And that's what I'm trying to get an understanding of, why we're getting that increase of 53% and why the exempt values are going down. I think a lot of times, this time of an election cycle, we see people trying to jump from exempt back to classified, to protect themselves.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's happening.
That is not happening. That is not
What happened in 2019?
Well, I'd ask that you get back with me with
Oh,
more
sure.
details.
I'd be happy to.
Because, I mean, the audit committee, which I'm on, is conveniently at a time I can never make, so I can't ask questions there, I only have here to ask them.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In fact, if you like, I can print you out the underlying schedule to support this.
Yeah.
I don't provide you the whole packet. I mean, it's fairly extensive. It's a binder of information, but I'm happy to provide.
If you could get that to me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lee, I think we have 10 currently GovX positions and 15 filled classified. 15.
1-5.
So if you're gonna fill 5 more, I mean, we have to think, if we're gonna go from 15 to 20, there's a big increase there in the classified.
Right, that's what I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have, as Steve mentioned earlier, we have one hire that's in motion right now. So that'll bring us up to 26, but that still will leave us 5 positions that are unfilled. And all of those, are driving that either.
Okay, so the resolution that you'll provide information to Lee.
Any of those union?
No, sir.
Okay. We have a deadline for submitting the appropriation, which is
September 4th.
Well, the 4th is.
So we need to take action on it. I recognize that we have an open issue that Lee has raised. I'm assuming you'll be able to satisfy him.
Absolutely.
I'll make the motion. Based on the recommendation of the SIC Audit Committee, I move that the State Investment Council approve the preliminary fiscal year 2020 appropriation request for the SIC as presented and memorialized to the council today. Second, Scott seconds it. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And all those opposed? 3 and 10 and all 3. Okay, 3 opposed. Thank you. It passes with 3 opposition. Next item on the agenda is government.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, I'd like to take up items B and C first.
Sure.
Which are under Mr. Klein.
Makes sense. Yeah.
They are settlement matters for HM Capital Partners and Cabrera Capital Markets. And I turn to Bruce and Evan for their background report regarding the recommendation of settlements. I will just say at the outset, the obvious, that the information that we are discussing here today is information that we are permitted to discuss, not confidential or restricted information. And secondly, and I'll ask you to address this, Bruce, in addition to all of the recommendations you will go through, I understand that our outside counsel, Dave Pitney, was deputized by the Attorney General, so we have the full support of the Attorney General in some recommendations.
That's right. I've also been deputized as
I see.
attorney general.
Okay, thank you.
Wearing two hats.
You talk about that.
I wish I did, I could show it when I get stopped for speeding. But no, I don't. So these are two settlements involving transactions which occurred in 2005, 2006, and 2007. So they're quite old. It's part of the pay-to-play litigation that we're winding up. You've got the settlements, for both of these cases, you've got the settlements already signed. They're not effective until the council actually approves them. So most of the information we can give you is already in the packets. I assume you've read that. I think one way to look at this is, well, the HM Capital case involves a fund that we invested in that was recommended to us, or Mark Carrera played some role in getting us to invest in that. The exact nature of the role is, of course, the dispute. We're never going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. And for that reason, that's one of the reasons we're settling it. The settlement, it's hard to put numbers on these things. So to give you some comfort in this, HN Capital, who's the first settlement, was involved with us, and they hired Mark Carrera to get a sale. Mark Carrera, we think, was a paid place scandal, and therefore we're settling. That's our basis for settling. New York had a similar problem. New York Common Retirement Fund also hired HN Capital. They hired HN Capital through somebody named Hank Morris. Hank Morris, unlike Mark Carrera, was actually charged by the Attorney General and went to jail for a couple of years. But they also settled with HN Capital. Much the same facts as ours, except instead of Mark Carrera for us, you have Hank Morris, who went to jail in New York for his role in this. New York had invested $70 million, and they ended up settling with HN Capital for about $1.5 million, so about 2% of what they invested. We invested $30 million, we're settling for $800,000, which is about 2.7%. These are, there's no way to give permanent comfort. We don't know what would happen if we actually settle this. The nature of any settlement is, if we actually do this trial. We're trying to get the best deal we could. Everybody who's looked at this thinks this is the best deal available. It's been negotiated back and forth. The complaint was originally filed in March of 2017. There's negotiations before that. Dave Pitney has been looking at all of these documents for years. So this is just more of the same. They've got a lot of background in which to look at these things. And they recommend the settlements. The state investment officer recommends the settlement, general counsel recommends the settlement, and I recommend the settlement. We think it's a good deal, relative to what was at stake, relative to what we can get. And we'd ask that you approve it. If you do approve it, it becomes a settlement. If you don't, we don't give money. It's as simple as that.
How many fees did that amount of fees that firm made off this investment?
About $2 million. So they're giving us, it's about $1.2 million that they're keeping.
And we lost the entire 30 million.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The entire 30 million essentially came back. We lost fees. The multiple is about 0.93. And if you did the math, that works out to, we invested 30 million, we got 30 million, they took some fees.
And there was a capital loss figure of 2.63 million? What
Yeah.
does that figure represent?
Well, that includes the fees.
That includes the fees.
So you got 2 million, so maybe we lost $500,000.
Okay.
It's very close to getting all the money back. There's not a huge loss associated with this.
Well, I think the time back
Oh, yeah, time back, I'm sorry.
is very significant. Tim?
You said that you guys were looking at this for a period of years. Why did you wait until 2017?
Well, it's a lot of moving parts. We had hoped we could settle this. Originally, the plan was to go after Mark Carrera
I'm
first.
gonna caution on just published information, I think, trying to stick to a public record and.
All right, I should say, it's part of an ongoing litigation plan that we have. It's not out of this ordinary course for us in our litigation. We've got another one of these suits lined up. We've sued another general partner recently, and that's probably going to go on for a while.
Evan?
Mr. Treasurer, the answer to your question is the state has no statute of limitations. And when we bring a lawsuit, we need to make sure that for Rule 11 purposes, for good faith purposes, that we have a good faith factual basis. So we used the data in the investigation to put together a complaint with allegations. That's why we provided you with as much as we could in terms of, this is probably the most transparent packet in terms of a settlement or approach that we've ever taken. A lot of it we do in closed session, we're actually trying to do it in open. And so what you have is a memorandum from counsel, all of the allegations that we were able to accumulate in our good faith allegations in the course of our investigation, and then all of the terms of the settlement. So everything's just out there. And so the strategy we came up with was, this is transparent, it's very important to stream, and one of the reasons we got this board was, as fiduciaries bring money in, we thought we could. And so we just wanted to give you as much information as you can, and give you in your conscience whether to vote it yes or no. But this is the public information that's out there.
Thank you. What has been in similar cases, what has been the percentage of settlement?
Well, that's why I used the New York one, because that's, all of these cases are somewhat similar. It depends on what kind of facts we have. I turn on a single email that we have or don't have. So based on similar behavior in New York, this is about the same percentage, so they got.
Actually, that's about 40% more than New York.
We got 40% more, and they had a criminal conviction of the person who was supposedly taking part in this. So we did slightly better on that basis. Say as close as you can get factually. We're doing better than New York did.
They're 40% more, so to speak. Where is that based on dollar?
Well, so they invested $70 million. We invested $30 million. They got $1.5 million back. We're getting $800,000 back.
I think it's misleading to talk about the investment. Relative.
Well, it's hard to get a good comparison. I mean, we're necessarily looking at apples and oranges, and because every one of these is going to be somewhat unique.
All I would say is probably not too useful, but a 40% recovery is an extremely high recovery in a situation like this, and it's good or better than we've done on our other settlements. So I've done settlements for the last 20 years, where you don't have an admission of guilt, substantive damage claim that we can put together. This is a pretty damn good settlement.
We think so.
Once again, we have unanimous recommendations from our legal team, our staff, our outside firms, and the deputies, attorneys.
Okay, so is there a motion? There is a motion.
I move that the settlement be accepted.
Okay. And Lee? Question. Shall we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so Bruce, what I'm trying to understand is the motion is for us to accept the settlement.
That's all that is in your packet.
Right.
Right.
But you've already signed it.
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out, okay, if the deal's been cut.
It was signed subject to our approval.
Right.
Well, I'm just surprised the signature's there before our approval. So I'm trying to understand that mechanism.
That's to give everybody assurance that we're so.
We wanted them to sign, they signed, we signed.
Subject
to our approval.
Nothing happens unless the SIC approves it. If the SIC doesn't approve it, it's gone.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to make sure is that the deal's not already done. We haven't already accepted it.
Okay, I'll
And
say
we're
it for
just
the
kind
third
of
time,
sitting
the deal is
here
not done,
after the
accepted to our
fact
approval.
because you've already signed it.
There's no procedures for that, and probably go to jail. So no.
Well, I would just recommend that moving forward, we don't sign a document that we're asking the SIC to approve before the SIC approves it.
They absolutely have to because they're on camera and their risk is, their reputation is at risk on contested claims. And there's they have an agreement in principle and it's subject, there is no settlement whatsoever unless you vote it as a majority for.
So I call the vote, please. All in favor?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Tim?
Evan, I missed it, so thanks for bringing that up, Lee, but this is signed by both parties.
That's right.
And nowhere in the agreement does it say that it comes before the,
It does, it's right in the agreement, it's right there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Would you read it?
only read six, the last paragraph.
Is that
Yes.
correct?
Where does it say? It has here at the top, the settlement agreement is between us, but,
Paragraph 2, this agreement shall become effective if and when approved by the NMSIC in accordance with the Open Meeting Act.
I think that's what it says.
I'm
All
sorry,
right.
can you just show me what that is again?
Page 2, paragraph 2 of the settlement agreement, which is sort of at the back of the packet.
It's 385 on
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr.
All right, again, I call the vote, please. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you. Unanimously passed. Thank you all. Next item is,
The Cabrera settlement.
Cabrera Capital Markets, they were a broker dealer who had an arrangement with Mark Carrera. Basically, they were giving, Mark Carrera worked through them and was responsible for getting paid and giving them some money. We never brought suit against them. They have signed an affidavit which the settlement is dependent upon. If anything, the affidavit proves to be untrue, the entire settlement is thrown out. At this point, they claim to have lost money because of their interactions, and they claim also not to have known that anything is going on with Mark Carrera. For a variety of reasons, we've decided to accept, or we think that $50,000 is a reasonable settlement under the circumstances. And again, this is recommended by our outside counsel, by our state investments officer, by general counsel, and by myself.
okay, any questions, Tim?
What, I really don't know how to ask the question, I guess, maybe we don't, didn't have legal implications, but doesn't CCM have an obligation to us, because of the misconduct of Herrera?
This is Cabrera. I
I know.
just keeping it separate.
Make sure.
The first case was Carrera,
Oh, I'm
this was
sorry.
Cabrera.
Right, but I thought that it was because of Mark Carrera that these guys are on the hook. But don't they have an obligation to us and an obligation to anybody else that they do business with to manage and mitigate any losses or damages that Mark Carrera created?
And that's pretty much
why?
the basis for our liability. I mean, that's their liability.
And that's the basis for their liability. So
Right.
on this particular one, what was our loss?
Well, these,
And you have in here somewhere, I think, $1.4 million in the fees or.
that's what was paid to Mark Carrera. They received 10% of that. And they say that their nets after their expenses was less than that.
So let's also be clear that whatever was paid to Carrera is arguably a number that we will look at, but it does not necessarily reflect a loss to us. It was not money that we directly paid. We don't think we were treated properly. We think we were an investment that we probably shouldn't have made. But in terms of computing an actual damage claim, it would be a lot more complex, and that number is not the correct number. So that's why these things get negotiated as they do.
So Bruce, what was our loss?
Yes, and we have an agreement.
Well, again, we don't have loss because these people didn't have a direct relationship
So
with
Columbus
us.
came back, all of it, everything.
They're,
These guys are not an investment manager, they are a broker dealer. In the course of our investigation, let's talk about what we gave you, because maybe that's helpful. So the first page of your packet is a memorandum, a recommendation memorandum saying why
publicly why we were settling this case, what they admitted to in purposes of their affidavit, the status of any claims against them, which have not been filed, but we have in good faith, and then the recommendation. The second part of this memorandum is a little different from the first, is their affidavit, because again, they're cooperating. They are a broker-dealer, they're not an investment manager. Mark Herrera sort of worked for them. That's an oversimplification, but that's the relationship. And the question is, do they have accountability because they employed him and maybe he was going to give them 10% of their stuff? You have to have work for a broker-dealer. They have taken some responsibility and said, we will pay you some money. He lied to us. That's their position. We lost money and we didn't get what we were owed. And we view that as a good faith settlement. But the notion that there was some loss to us, to the extent you believe that, we are litigating that in multiple other forums in our pay-to-play litigation versus Mark Herrera. This is simply bringing money in from parties that are quasi-allegedly implicated by virtue of our
By virtue of their having a fee agreement with Mark Herrera.
So we wrote no check to this, we never wrote a check to these people.
It's like suing Caldwell Banker or talking Caldwell Banker because one of their part-time people was had alleged problems.
And while it's not particularly relevant directly, we've had, I don't know how many settlements, 7 or 8 settlements over the last X number of years. And a number of them have fallen into this financial area. This is not out of line with some of the other settlements that are made.
Right, it's consistent with our approach to honestly advocate for the best results we can. These two net are obviously $850,000, and you're looking at approaching $43.5 million in potential recoveries, some of which are in escrow, but it's a lot of work, and it's consistent with what we've done before, and we're trying to tie up these things.
Okay, and on that note, I'd like a motion. Did I get the motion?
I make the motion.
Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other comments? I take the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aubrey is opposed. Anybody else? Okay, very good. Thank you all.
The only thing I would add, because we're on camera, these are all allegations, it's all contested matter, and it's all a settlement of disputed claims.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Evan. I'm going to move back to the government committee report and ask you to turn to the government's minutes. These have not yet been approved. We, as you know, will be meeting after this council meeting, as is our practice, and we're all invited to attend. Page 334 of the PDF are our minutes of June 26, which we will be approving today. And I would like to start with item 2, which is our approval by consensus in the committee of a 3-year strategic plan document, which was prepared by our staff and the SIO. Do we have that handout of the 3-year plan?
I do have the 3-year plan.
You do. Would you kindly pass that around? It didn't make the PDF, but I'd like you each have a copy. As that is going around, I will just provide a little bit of background. You'll recall that in an earlier report, I mentioned what has been the practice up until now by our chief investment officer and the staff, reporting twice a year on goals and accomplishments. And that's a very robust, comprehensive, detailed, retrospective look at what's been accomplished over the period of 6 months or a year. And any governance committee, we wanted to get a prospective plan. What are we going to accomplish over the next 12 months? And build consensus around that, both at the committee and at the council level. And we wanted it to be a fairly straightforward and simple document, which I hope this represents. We have done two things in this. In addition to making it prospective, we've also switched to a fiscal year. So we're now beginning the 12-month period that is covered by this. So Do we have an next one? Okay, great. So we're talking about what will be accomplished between July 1 of 2018 and June, is that right? June 30th of 2019. And you'll see that it covers goals, objectives, and key results. There are 8 areas for goals: implementing the annual investment plan, achieving intergenerational equity and distributions over time, analyzing, monitoring, and managing the risks, restoring governance with council to legislative framework, which I will discuss following these remarks. Observe fiduciary best practices, conduct regular reviews of performance of council, committees, and SIO, develop succession plans for the state investment officer, both on an emergency and a long-term basis, and improve public, legislative, and client communication. So those are the 8 areas in which we have established goals and objectives. The objectives are in the middle column, and the key results that we are looking at for each of these objectives are in the third column. Part of the reason we think this will be valuable is not only to have a shared consensus of what it is we're trying to accomplish over the upcoming period, but also then to have a framework for conducting these evaluations. I think rule 101 in doing evaluations is to be very clear with the people, the committees, and the councils who are evaluating, to set expectations at the outset, so that when in fact we do conduct evaluations, it's on that basis. There's nothing arbitrary, there's nothing opaque, it's all done on the basis of an agreed upon framework in advance. This work was done with the collaboration of all the staff, from the bottom up as well as the top down. And Steve, I'll turn to you to make comments about how your team put this framework together and how you view it as being useful going forward.
This is essentially a different format from what we've been doing for you every year, called accomplishments and goals, as Lynn mentioned. And your management group worked carefully to craft each of these items. Worked with the governance committee after we had put a draft together, and this is the result. That's pretty much the story.
You'll notice that in the outlying years, this is eventually going to be a more detailed 3-year plan. But as we are new to this type of planning, we have put more detail into year 1 with what I'll call compass points or sketches, outlines for the years 2 and 3. And as we get better at this and have more experience, we'll begin to build out the subsequent years. But for our purposes, we'll be focusing really on this first fiscal year. See how it works, see what changes we may want to make. We'll review it annually at the council, in the governance committee, and have the opportunity to revise it to meet our needs going forward.
Let me also mention the notes at the bottom of the back page, the second page there. There are still a few things that have not been acted on, which emerged from the Ennis-Knupp fiduciary review in 2010, and which the council specified when the council approved the 2013 strategic plan, and we just thought it'd be helpful to list those there.
So I'd like to open it up for comments or questions, thoughts, anyone have anything further they'd like to add?
Okay, question. Lee, please.
Okay,
I understand that this is a plan that the governor's committee is recommending.
Right.
But it seems to me that the plan needs to be reviewed and adopted by the council.
I think that would be desirable.
So, but I mean, I think it's because, particularly the SIO works for the council.
Right.
And so any review of the SIO's performance should be on a methodology that the council agrees to, not just a governance committee and the governance committee doing the whole evaluation. So having just received this, I haven't had time to really digest it. I don't know what your motion there, I don't see a motion on the agenda.
This is for informational purposes. This is the first opportunity to share with you the framework, the concept, the content as it exists, going through what the preliminary review and building a consensus in the governance committee. And I would invite you to take it, read it, and we can either treat it as a conversation in our next council meeting for consensus, or submit it to vote wherever the pleasure of the council is. But yes, it's important to have this document or any revised version of this document be endorsed by the council.
Right. I just want to make sure that any action we take today isn't necessarily.
No, this is a
blessing
setup,
this.
if you will,
Okay.
a preliminary background discussion.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I understand where we're headed. Thank you.
So, and I welcome individual comments, you're welcome to come to governance today, with any further comments. You want to happy to chat on the phone, or take an email, or any suggestions between now and our next meeting.
Okay, Linda, you had a comment?
Oh, I just think it's very beneficial for us as a council to set out what our goals are and to formalize these. So I think this is a move, and I really urge people to have any input to make it a document that we think we can, as a council, approve in forthcoming meetings.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the other item, which is summarized in our minutes, the updated CIC charter and investment policy statement, item 3. That's on page 325 of the PDF.
365.
335 of the PDF.
Oh, of the PDF,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, yeah. The gap gets bigger as we go further into the, I've got these things.
Do you have a?
365 on diligent?
Well, I think.
I'm looking at the governance committee minutes, and there are 335.
369.
On diligence.
369.
369 diligence, 335
335 on
on PDF. Great, thank you. As you know, historically, in 2010, the council adopted charters for each of its committees. And we have been working in governance with the cooperation and oversight of the council to update those charters. The audit committee charter was updated in 2014, the governance charter was updated in 2017, and we are now in the process of updating the investment council charter. There has been a great deal of thought and work going into the investment charter under Linda's guidance in her committee. And it includes not just the investment committee charter, but the investment policy, which is very closely linked with the charter, and which is a very important part of the oversight provided by the committee and the council. But we are preparing a council charter, which was one of the recommendations of Hewitt and this committee. I guess, who are they required by? I can say their parent name now. Aon. So there have been many pieces to this. It's been a long, arduous project. We are not yet complete because we have a set of recommendations that came from the investment committee. And they were discussed at the last governance committee meeting. As the minutes capture, the governance committee had a recommendation that is different from the recommendation that came from the investment committee, we are now asking the investment committee to take a second look at the charter and at the investment committee policy. And after those committee has had an opportunity to review our recommendations for governance, we will then hopefully be bringing this all in final form to the council at our next meeting. So again, this is a background discussion. There's nothing to be voted today, there are no decisions to be made today. But I do want to take a moment just to tell you what has driven a lot of the changes, and that was a very extensive review by our legal counsel and by the governance committee of the legislative framework. And I'm going to turn to Evan and Bruce to discuss this in more detail. I have a memorandum which I'm going to pass out. And again, I'm not expected to suggest this today, but to read it at your convenience and have it as background for our subsequent conversations. Thank you. I'll summarize the key points, which are that for the past 8 years, there has been a practice in the council of approving all investment decisions at the council level. What we determined in this legal and legislative review is that that practice does not conform with the legal framework or the statutory and constitutional framework under which we operate. And that's what this memo is about. It provides specific references to the constitutional provisions and to the statutory provisions that assign the responsibility for making individual investments to the state investment officer and to the state investment office more broadly, which includes our entire professional staff. By contrast, the responsibility of this council is to provide the overall fiduciary oversight of, I would say, the highest order of review, and that is conformance with policy, development of policy, asset allocation, approval of consultants, review of performance, review of risk management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So part of what we are endeavoring to do in these revisions of the investment committee charter and the development of the council charter is to make the distinction in conformance with the statutory and constitutional framework. That's a mouthful, I'm going to stop. Again, not looking for any reaction, endorsement today, but I would like you to have a heads up, know where we are in the process, to be able to read this memorandum and see what the legislative and statutory and constitutional framework does provide. And we'll come back to you after the investment committee meets with a more finalized set of drafts. Linda, I don't know if you'd like to make any comments from the investment committee perspective. You've done a lot of hard work on this, I appreciate it.
As we all know from all the documents that we saw today, almost all of our investment performance comes from our strategic asset allocation, with only a very small minimum coming from manager selection. That manager selection is not legally within our purview as well, because that's not within our wheelhouse of expertise. There are a few people sitting at this table who actually do have some professional investment expertise, but I can assure you we all feel quite inferior to the knowledge of professionalism that our staff and consultants bring to that decision. So we feel that the best way is to leave the manager decision to those with the expertise whose job it is to do that. They're looking at it 5 days a week, and that's what their job is, and that's what their training and expertise is. It's not ours. So we are to oversee the asset allocation, which the strategic asset allocation, which is what really drives performance. And indeed, the amount of time that we spend on a function doesn't even belong to us takes us away from some of the things that we should be doing, both as an investment committee and as a council. There are things that we have done backhandedly by looking at these managers, but we ought to do them. That's what we ought to be spending our time on, whether it's asset allocation, the due diligence, the sourcing, the policies on the asset allocation, and review of us, review of our state investment officer. These are things that we should be doing and we aren't doing because we are lost in the weeds of trying to select managers for which we don't have any expertise. So I think this is a tremendous step forward and will do nothing but benefit us as a council and help us to focus on the things that are important and for which we were actually selected to do. Because there are things that the group around here does have expertise in doing. So I really, would really support this. The majority of our investment committee has. We've had some robust discussions on this, and the majority have felt that this was the way to go.
And your plan going forward as well?
We will be bringing this before the investment committee for a decision on the final draft of the chart. And then that will then, it depends on how governance goes today as to whether they say they approve it the way it is. So we approve it and then it could be.
No, we would hope, we'll see what the pleasure is of the governance committee, but we would hope we could approve it in principle, subject to the revisions made in the investment committee to the investment committee charter and the investment policy. And if that happens in the investment committee meeting on September 13th, then we would be in a position to bring it to the council at the September 25th meeting.
Okay, good, thank you.
Just as a discussion, as we move forward on this,
Mhm.
I'd like to get a little bit more dialogue on how this differs from the whole fight that we've had with land and the legacy issues.
Oh.
And so as we go forward, I'm gonna expect there to be some discussion as to how this is different and how we're better in that position. So we can cover that later.
Good. That was a very big concern.
This particular process wasn't unanimous at the investment committee, nor will it be. And I think that some of the things that are gonna have to be discussed, I think we ought to prepare for a pretty robust debate. If in fact this comes out of the investment committee and the governance committee, I think we ought to prepare for a pretty robust debate at the September council meeting.
You know, and just looking at that, going through this whole thing, you know, maybe I'm the only one, but I noticed in the governor's committee, Mr. Nathan made a recommendation and it was voted on. He moved it and it was voted on. So, you know, I don't know that he necessarily has the authority to make motions in that committee, in my opinion.
He does.
I know we approved him or put him on there, but I don't know.
Yes, we voted to make all of the members of all of our committees voting members. And you are absolutely correct, he was the member. He has, as you know, quite an extensive background in legislative matters. He was very interested in the analysis that was presented by our legal team that I really don't think at the end of the day, when you had the opportunity to read the various provisions and ask questions, as you are certainly encouraged to do of Ellen and Bruce, there is no question that we are out of conformance as a legal matter. And Fred's view was very clear that a halfway measure of going to what was initially recommended by the investment committee, which was to have the council approve new investments but not re-ups, that did not solve the problem of bringing us into conformance with the legal framework. So To your question, yes, he does have the authority to go and to make a motion in the committee. But of course, it's the council who will take into account all the recommendations from investment committee, governance, our legal team, the issues at hand, and make a decision.
Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, this is an item for our next agendas coming up. And I think we're concluding your report.
Yes,
Thank you very much. Any other items to report, any new business, old business, any speakers? Okay. I then accept the motion for adjournment from Scott and the second from Duffy. Thank you very much.
How are you doing? Good to see you. See you.
Makes it really hard to these two involved.
Yeah,